Welcome to the Covered Bridges of New Hampshire podcast, where we discuss all things related to covered bridges in the Granite State. Here's your host, Kim Chandler.
Hello, Covered Bridge people, and welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking with lifelong Swanzey resident Lee Dunham about the namesake of the Thompson Covered Bridge. Lee walks us through the exciting life of actor and playwright Denman Thompson and his production, The Old Homestead, and how integral the play has been to the town of Swanzey for over 100 years. Here we go. The covered bridge in West Swanzey is officially known as the West Swanzey Bridge, but to locals, it's known as the Thompson Bridge. Built in 1832 by craftsman Zadok Taft, the Thompson Bridge crosses the Ashwelot River in West Swanzey near the site of the Homestead Woolen Mill. The more familiar name of the covered bridge is connected to West Swanzey resident Denman Thompson. Thompson wrote a play entitled Joshua Whitcomb, which drew on characters from his hometown. That play later morphed into a nationally acclaimed theater production called The Old Homestead. To learn more about Denman Thompson, we're talking today with Lee Dunham. Lee is the current president of the Old Homestead Association, of which he has been a member for over 55 years. Lee is a 45-year member of the Swanzey Fire Department, where he served as a fire chief. He is retired from 23 years of service to the Swanzey Department of Public Works. 18 of those years he served as the director. Lee is currently the Swanzey Cemetery sexton. But moreover, Lee is a lifelong resident of Swanzey and the official historian of the town. Welcome to the podcast, Lee.
Well, thank you very much.
Let's start with a brief history of the West Swanzey, or the Thompson Bridge. The covered bridge was built in 1832, and it replaced an earlier uncovered structure that was built in 1774. Can you talk about the area of West Swanzey and what it looked like during the early 1800s?
Swanzey is it's one of those weird towns. It's not alone. We were first granted our township by the governor of Massachusetts in 1733. They didn't really know who owned this land up here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're sort of out in the left field as far as New Hampshire's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And back in that time, there were no settlements this far out. So 1733 is that first date, and nobody came up here probably till 1734, 35, when they started the settlement. This is, as a historian, you always want to go back and talk to these people and find out what was on their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you build the first division of land? Why did that get settled in Swanzey Center? I'm actually sitting on one of those first divisions of land right now. When you knew there's no water power. I mean, in the 1730s, you have to have water power to do a sawmill, to grist mill, and anything to do, so for power. They knew that because they offered Ephraim Jones 200 acres of land if he'd build a sawmill and keep it running.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had a 10-year time frame on it that he had to have it operational and keep it going. But because of the Native Americans in the area and the lack of soldiers, if you will, they abandoned the town.
Oh.
Between New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they figured that out in 1740, and New Hampshire wins. So they're in New Hampshire now, and we're Swanzey. That's where our name comes in 1753. By that time, Ephraim Jones is no longer alive, so he doesn't fulfill his debt to the town, so he loses that land. It ends up in the hands of a Joshua Whitcomb, or Joseph Whitcomb.
Okay.
Joshua will come later. But Joseph Whitcomb and his son, they build a mill right away on the west side. And so that area has always been a mill area right by the bridge. And that's why there was a bridge there previous to the Thompson Covered Bridge. There were mills on both sides of the river.
Okay. So the bridge builder was Zadok Lovell Taft. And what do we know about him and his family?
The family of Tafts were carpenters, and they were mechanic. mechanically minded people.
Mhm.
So the other unusual thing, because if you ever have opened Reed's history, half of it or more than half of it seems to be genealogy.
Mhm.
So Zadok actually married not one, but two of Aquila Ramsdell's daughters. He married Italy first. And that was 18. I had it down here somewhere.
1810, I think.
Yeah, 1810. She
Mhm.
unfortunately dies in 1818. So he marries the second one, which was Anna, in 1819.
Mhm.
So, and I think that was probably a little more common back then. There's not a lot of
Mhm.
people around. So
Right. I think so too. I've actually seen that quite a bit in the research.
yeah.
And the Old Homestead mill was built in 1850. Can you tell us about that mill?
I've never heard it called the Old Homestead Mill.
Okay.
Homestead Wool, okay, is the last incarnation was the Homestead Woolen Mill. I will tell you this: if you do look up history of mills in general, any mill, you find a number of people who owned and operated it. You might find somebody owned it for 10 years. It burned to the ground. They rebuilt it and sold it to somebody else.
Mhm.
Or they ran it for a couple of years, didn't make good at it, so they sold it. So this goes, the mills on either side of the river there go through a bunch of hands. You'll see Wickham's, you'll see Stratton. It's at one point referred to as the Stratton Mills. West Swanzey Manufacturing Company is one of the names that goes on to it.
Mhm.
And then the last one in 1911, it's bought by the Brown family, and that's where Homestead Woolen Mill comes from. And I do believe that comes from Denman Thompson's play, The Old
Okay.
Homestead.
Yep. Well, that would make sense. So, speaking of Denman Thompson, he was born in 1833 in Pennsylvania to Rufus Thompson and Anne Hathaway Baxter. And the family was originally from West Swansea, and they moved back to the area when Denman was 14 years old. What do we know about the Thompson family during this time?
Thompson family, of course, they're one of the Thompson name is on the first land granters. They were here when we first started.
Mm-hmm.
However, Rufus sort of had that itch to go west, young man. so he did. And I mean, the frontier when he goes west is western Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And he settles in a little, we'll call it a village, so to speak, of Beechwood. And it's a part of Girard, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So it's pretty much right on the Lake Erie shores. Denman was born there. Rufus was he was a carpenter by trade. But again, he was one of those mechanically inclined people who could fix most anything. So he was very valuable out in the frontier. Mm-hmm. It's a rough life. And so they decided to come home to the homestead that they knew. But at that point in time, Denman is an apprentice, so to speak, for his dad, or Rufus. Mm-hmm. He does that in the summertime, and then in the wintertime he went to school. So I think it's 2 or maybe 3 years. It's kind of tough to tell how things go here, but he spends at the Mount Caesar Academy, which is where our Mount Caesar Library is today.
Okay. And when he was about 17 years old, from what I've read, he literally joined the circus and left home in search of his future. And I absolutely love that. But do we know about that? Like, what was he doing in the circus?
He actually went to Boston on shoe leather for the most part, and he joined Tyrone's circus. First thing he does is what it says in print that I've seen is he's a keeper of banners and poles. now that's sort of like a property boy,
Mm-hmm.
takes care of putting up the banners for the circus when they arrive someplace, and then probably would take them down when they leave.
Mm-hmm.
But Denman he was an athletic kid. So he also, while he was with the circus, he practiced with the acrobats and sort of got good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he performed, I can't tell you that. I've never seen that in print.
Right.
But the other thing is, I really don't see whether he stays any longer than one season with the circus. I think that was just him getting approval from his parents, at 17,
Right.
to leave, and they reluctantly let him.
It sounds like about 1852, Thompson began acting in Lowell and later moved to Toronto, Canada, where he continued to make a living as an actor. And he got married during that time to Marie Bolton and had 3 children. What do we know about this time in his life?
He ends up in Lowell at, I think it's a relative's store, working as a clerk. That's where he does get into the theater and actually does his first speaking part, very small speaking part, gets the taste of it. And that brings him to, the 1850s life of theater.
Mm-hmm.
The life of theater in that time period is, the theaters themselves had what they called stock companies, actors that would take up all the smaller roles in the productions that went on, and then the mainliners would be the ones that traveled from town to town.
Okay.
And that's what Denman did, and also he was athletic. Like I said, he could dance, and that helped him actually be a little bit more worth, get a little bit more bang for his buck, to dance during set changes.
Mm-hmm.
On the wings of the theater, you'd have, jigs and reels being danced, something to entertain people while they couldn't see anything else.
Right. Because they didn't have their cell phones to look at while they were waiting.
Right.
Thompson later joined the vaudeville circuit of the 1870s, and he eventually wrote and performed in a skit about a New Hampshire prodigal son called Joshua Whitcomb. And we know Whitcomb was a local name, but tell me a little bit more about that family.
Well, Whitcombs are deep in my ancestry.
Oh, good.
My grandmother was a Whitcomb.
Okay.
So I'm a direct descendant of Captain Otis Whitcomb.
Oh, great.
And Captain Otis was one half of Joshua Whitcomb. So Joshua Holbrook was the other half. And Joshua Holbrook was said to be the honest, the old wise farmer end of it, and Captain Otis was the humorous side, the wrestle at town meeting side. The interesting thing about Denman is he's 42 when this happens to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's gone through most of his life, had his family and everything while he was playing minor parts. Not making much more than, I think the most he ever made was $25 for the week. He gets to the point where he's in Pittsburgh, contracts a bout of rheumatism, which we can only explain as rheumatoid arthritis, which now that takes that edge off him so that he can't do the spry move and whatever.
Right.
So what does he do? He's lying in bed saying, what can I do now? How can I make a living? An old Yankee farmer. And he just came back to, think about this. 3 years he was here in Swanzey. 3 years he would have known Captain Otis and Joshua Holbrook.
Mm-hmm.
Joshua Holbrook never did see his likeness on stage. He died before that. My ancestor, Captain Otis, got to see the stage production of Joshua Wickham, not the Old Homestead.
Okay. What did he think? Do we know?
Joshua came, or Denman came out on stage with the oxen, and supposedly Captain Otis got up and started laughing, and he said, Denman, you're all right, you've gone wrong. You've got the off ox on the nigh side. Ox have their, one has to be on one side and one has to be, that's what they learn. So if that's true, those are things. I mean, my grandmother gave a few insights into things that over the years I picked up. But
first, this was it was just a 20-minute sketch, but it sounds like it developed into a 3-act play that was a huge deal. Can you tell us about that?
He does this 25-minute sketch of Josh Wickham. And as he continues to play it, and people are interested in it anyway, he meets a guy by the name of J.M. Hill in Chicago. And J.M. Hill likes what he sees. And he's the one that ends up being Denman's manager for, I think, about 4 or 5 years. And he's the one that says, Denman, you need to make this into a play.
Mm-hmm.
And he does. He develops it into a 3-act play. I'm going to go on a limb because I've got a program here that has it as a 4-act play.
Oh.
So at the end of it, it's now 4 acts.
Okay.
The differences between it are Denman goes to Boston instead of New York City. So it has the same sort of 2 acts in Swanzey, 2 acts in Boston. And, instead of the Old Homestead, there's 2 acts in Swanzey and 2 acts in New York.
Okay. What was his partnership like with J.M. Hill?
Like I said, he was the manager. He'd go and get him into the towns that he went into. And J.M. Hill was pretty smart about this. They didn't do a lot of, they did a lot of sort of advertising, but it's very subtle advertising. And it didn't start out really great around in New England that well. But as they moved west, that's where it started to pick up steam. What they do is they're an unknown quantity here.
Mm-hmm.
People that are going don't know what they're getting. So he doesn't get the best theaters in town.
Mm-hmm.
Might not, but he'll get a theater. And the first night it might be half full, but word of mouth.
Right.
They'd play the same theater for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And it would just grow.
Smart.
About 1881, or maybe just a little bit before that, they split $400,000.
Wow.
So, and I'll put this tidbit out, and if you know where his house is,
mm-hmm.
when you go by it, stop, just take a look at the gable on the front porch. It's stained glass, and the year 1879.
Okay.
So that's 3 years before the Old Homestead. Actually, more than 3 years before the Old Homestead. 1886 is when the Old Homestead comes out.
Okay.
So he's able to build a house with money earned from Joshua Wickham.
Okay. And you did talk a little bit about what the characters are based on, but can you tell us about, like, what is the play about? Like, can you give us a quick synopsis?
I can't talk to you really about what Joshua Wickham was about because I've never seen a script of that.
Okay.
But the Old Homestead, which is the sequel to Joshua Wickham,
okay,
is loosely, we'll call it loosely based on the Prodigal Son. And what it is Denman's or Joshua Wickham. I'm sort of like Joshua Wickham. And Denman Thompson. Denman Thompson got to the point where one of his last interviews, he said, I really don't know whether I'm playing Josh Wickham or Josh Wickham is masquerading as me on the street. Denman. So, yeah, he wasn't acting anymore. He was the character that he put on stage. But that story is about his son, Rube Wickham, being accused of robbing the bank, the Cheshire Bank here in Keene. And he didn't do it, but he left, and to get away from shame, he left town. He goes to New York City. New York City in the 1880s, not a good place. I think a line from the play is, near half the young men in New York, alcohol has taken, and really got a grip on them. So, and Rube is one of those.
Okay.
As drunk as they make him, is what they say.
Mm-hmm.
But Josh goes and finds him and brings him and allows him to come back home. So the end scene is the grand scene at New Year's Eve at the kitchen of the Old Homestead house. He brought to theater realism. And that was the appeal. That's why he started this play. Joshua Wickham, he started in 1875,
Mm-hmm.
the sketch, 1877 for the play. But the Old Homestead starts in 1886. He's still playing it in 1911 when he dies.
Mm.
How can something stay that long? Look at the country at this point in time. And the Industrial Revolution, the cities are blowing up. Everybody's leaving the farms in New England.
Mm-hmm.
That's when our hill farms get vacated. If you look at census figures, you'll actually see the census figures drop in New Hampshire. All these people are headed off into the cities to get work, to get, to do whatever. So they're not working on the farm anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The train has come. The train brings goods and wool in, so farmers don't need to produce as much wool as they did for the factories.
Right.
So a bunch of changes happened. So what would you think if you went into a play and you saw your childhood kitchen
Right.
on the stage?
Mm-hmm.
Dried apples strung across, and the sights, the smells of childhood
Mm-hmm.
is what he brought.
Right.
The oxen, live oxen. He brought live oxen on stage wherever he could. So I couldn't do it every place.
Right. Right. Well, that'll definitely increase the smell factor. There's no doubt about that.
Well, yes.
Well, and I saw that the Old Homestead debuted on Broadway in 1906, which to be on Broadway is a very big deal today. It certainly was a big deal then. And then in 1915, it was made into a silent film. Where's the film?
Yeah, I did a program for the Historical Society through the Keene State, I believe it was. And we did a talk about Denman Thompson. And we talked about the film because it was put into film at least twice, maybe three times. I got a call within a week from Cheshire Historical Society. They found a copy of it.
Wow.
So they found a copy of actually two versions of it. One was 1915, 17, whatever. That one's kind of interesting because it was filmed in Winchester.
Oh,
You know the little bank that's in the little. There's an old bank right in the center of Winchester.
okay.
Still there. I don't think it's occupied at all, but it's still there. It was filmed there on a barn on the homestead. The old homestead house that it was filmed in is on the way into Winchester, so it's still there.
Okay.
Well, right now we're in the midst of trying to get funding to get it restored.
Oh, that's great. So the old homestead was and continues to be very relevant to the townspeople of Swanzey, and it was performed annually for many, many years. Did Denman ever put on a performance in his hometown? Do we know?
Yeah, no, there was no place big enough to put it actually on.
Okay.
The closest, and I didn't find this really out until recent. I'd known it was done at the Keene City Hall in 1933. They did 3 acts of the play for the 100th anniversary of Denman's birth in 1933 and the 200th anniversary of the town of Swanzey.
Okay.
Now, the Keene City Hall was not the Keene City Hall that they have today. It was the old Keene Opera House.
Opera House, yeah.
And Denman had actually played at the Opera House, many times toward the, in the 1900s.
Okay.
So that's as close as he got. Now, I'm told that when he put on the Old Homestead in Boston, they'd actually put on a special train from Keene, down through Fitchburg down to Boston.
That's great.
Folks up here that wanted to go down and see it. And that's where I believe my great-great-great-grandfather saw Denman, playing Joshua Wickham. I think that's... Now, the story my grandmother always told, and these are little urban myths,
Right?
legends, if you will. But because she told me this one thing too, and she said that Denman Thompson gave him a cane because he was the original Uncle Josh, and that's true. She said he got it at the Old Homestead. That's not true.
Okay.
He died in 1882, so he did not see the Old Homestead. He saw Joshua Wickham.
Okay.
The play before. Now, I'm told that Denman took him down to New York. And in New York, he got caught up in front of the Grace Church on 10th and Broadway and just absolutely fell in love with it because of the music being played and whatever. And that ended up in the Old Homestead.
Okay.
So the third act is based in front of Grace Church in New York City.
Nice.
So
nice.
Now, that sounds good. I'll go with it. Can I say it's absolutely true?
Right.
Now, on the movie, I can tell you this. I've seen an article that was an interview with Frank Thompson, Denman's son.
Mm-hmm.
Frank is the one that actually took over the production when Denman passed away. So he's the one that finally put an end to it, so to speak, because it's only can do it so long.
Mm-hmm.
But he had been getting requests from the motion picture industry to do the play, and it was a hard thing for him to let go.
Mm.
So he finally did sign off and let them do it, hoping they'd do it well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know as they did it well, but It's it's like anything. If you read the book and if
Yeah.
you watch the movie, they're two different
Yes,
things.
yes, they usually are for
If you know
sure.
the play, the movie is nothing like the play.
Okay. Tell me this. What is the potash bowl?
The potash bowl.
Okay. See, I don't even pronounce it right.
The potash
The
bowl.
potash bowl.
When let's get into the 1933 with the 200th anniversary and the playing of the Old Homestead in Keene started something in a few people's minds. The North Swanzey Community Association, they had just put up a house, community house, so that they could have a place to meet up there. And they were looking for a way to pay off their mortgage. And I'll attribute it to Leland Bogue, suggested that they do the play. They knew that was going to be a big proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like today's plays where there might be 4 or 5 actors. It's like 20 or better actors. So they brought in the brick meeting house down here in Swanzey, the first congregational church, to do it also with them. And they put it together. Harold Adams was a trustee of the Carpenter home at the time up on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed the amphitheater down there. And he said, boy, this would be a good place to do this. So they did.
Okay.
1939. And they played to, I think it was close to 5,000 people over 3 nights.
Wow.
So it was like over 1,000 people a night.
Wow. And that went on for 75 years?
Yeah, it was a little longer than 75 years because a couple of years during the war couldn't go on because of light and a lot of men were gone.
Right.
Let's put it this way.
Yep, exactly.
We were missing a few key elements, but you also couldn't. You had blackout restrictions around here,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like 77, 78 years for us to do 75.
Okay.
We did it, and I can tell you, I remember when I was a kid, the hill being full. So, I mean, being full, you had to pick your spots to walk down through. So,
Wow. And I read somewhere that you wrote that the play has been a part of your entire life every summer from the time that, and this is your quote, that I could not stay up to the end of the last years when I was usually the last person on the grounds. And can you tell us about your involvement with the Old Homestead?
now like I said, if you look at programs, there's a Dunham or a Wickham in every year. My first memory is my parents were involved with the properties. So when sets were changed, they did all the furniture and everything that dressed up the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they wouldn't let me officially work until 1970. So I won't say I didn't do stuff. Yeah, I did. I helped them out because I was there every night for rehearsals and stuff. So, but I couldn't officially do that until 1970. In 1970, what I did was I worked in the refreshment stand popping corn.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd go between acts, I'd go help change the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd get back and cook popcorn some more. So that's how I started. After the place, the stage burned down December 11th, 1978. And after that's when I got on, I actually started playing first Eb Gansey, And then I worked my way up to Eb Gansey, to Seth Perkins, old cantankerous guy. And then from there, in 2011, I started Joshua Whitcomb myself.
That's great.
I was the last Joshua Whitcomb.
You were the last one.
I was the last one at this point. Maybe it'll come back. Who knows? We're actually discussing the idea that it started in the 200th anniversary of the town, which was 1933. Well, guess what? 10 years away. 10 years from now, it ought to come back just for a couple night performance. So.
Right. And what was that like for you to play Uncle Josh?
I don't know as I'll say I was the best one at it, but it really, to me, it's when you're playing, you're playing, a character that is close, in relationship to you.
Right.
I mean, you're trying to bring out, do I have some of those traits? Maybe I do. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about Denman Thompson's home. He had a 22-room mansion in West Swanzey that still stands today. Can you tell us about that property?
That property, actually, it stands on the location that Dr. Baxter, I believe it's Dr. Henry Baxter, that's where his homestead was. And that is Denman's, I'll get this right, as a grandmother. Because his mother was a Baxter. He builds quite the mansion on that place. I mean, even in 1888, I think, is when J.A. French, local photographer in Keene, took pictures from the belfry in West Swansea Church.
Okay.
And the picture that goes out toward there is like, you can't mistake it.
Wow.
It's gigantic compared to anybody else.
Right.
I mean, it had not only the house, but what we call the doll house, which I have to show you a picture of the dollhouse, and then you look at what's there now, and you can see the dollhouse, and then behind it is this massive addition to it. It's an apartment now.
Okay.
The dollhouse was made for his grandchildren.
Okay.
And it was a very small house with porch, working wood cook stove.
Wow.
Miniature size. I mean, we get to talk to a great granddaughter, I think it was, who played in the house. And it was kind of neat to hear her take on it. So,
wow.
And then next to that was a greenhouse with elaborate, glass, for plants and stuff. And the house portion of that's still there, and that's another apartment.
Okay, so
or another house, total house. I don't know.
What is in the mansion today?
It's been cut up into I don't know how many apartments.
Okay.
But, so
yeah,
that's unfortunate, but
yeah, that happens.
I mean, when Denman passed, it stayed in the family for a couple of years, but then it was bought by the Knights of Pythias, sort of I'll call it fraternal organization, sort of, I think loosely based with Catholic faith and stuff. I think I'm not 100% sure because they were gone by the time I was there. And they had a sort of like a convalescent home for their members.
Okay.
And they started to sell off some of the stuff that was on the grounds and whatever when they started to get done.
And did he have a summer property too?
Oh yeah. between him between him and his at least two, I don't know if the third one had a cottage, pretty much the whole east side of Swanzey Lake. So Denman's was where the Swanzey Lake campground is.
Okay.
A little further north was Frank's, which is right on the lake. That house was torn down and rebuilt by the owners. So while it's on the same footprint, it's not the same
Right.
house. And then Annie's, I think her house was the furthest north, just before Pilgrim Pines Beach.
Okay. And what is the connection between West Swanzey and Denman Thompson and the Old Homestead?
The connection between it, I mean, Denman, for a guy who lived here for 3 years in his youth, he came when he made it big. I mean, it wasn't until he got his fame and fortune with Joshua Wickham. But at that point, he came back and he set up roots, and he stayed here in Swanzey for, I think, we have at the Historical Museum, we have the papers of one of the Hannahs that was in the play.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, I think it's a 1903, 1904 notebook that has the itinerary for the year. And it's all handwritten, no photocopy.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, 1904. So they take off on the road somewhere in October, and they go down to Boston, and they come back up, and they go through New Hampshire up into Maine. And then they'll come back down, and they'll go down the eastern seaboard all the way down to the south, go across the southern part of the state, of the country,
Mm-hmm.
out to the west, go up, then come back into the Midwest states and end up. So they start in October, they take 2 weeks off for Christmas. They end, I think, in the beginning of May. So he comes home May, June, July, August, and then they get ready to do it again.
Wow.
And he'd have the whole group. He would get the whole group together down at the lake. They do rehearsals and stuff before they get out on the road.
Wow.
So you think of Denman Thompson getting on the train in West Swansea and heading to all points.
Right. Right. So officially, the covered bridge is the West Swansea Bridge. I just want to make that clear. But how?
I like the fact that you figured that one. I mean, a lot of people don't know that.
No, they don't. But how did it become the Denman Thompson Bridge?
Well, I'm gonna give you two scenarios, and I don't know which one is actual truth yet. Go back to the bicentennial, 1976. We had a committee out there, and one of their acts was to paint the Carlton Road Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's the smallest bridge.
Yep.
I think at that point I'm pretty sure it was closed.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that made it easier to paint because you didn't have to worry about traffic. But I don't remember there being signs on them before. And I don't know if the signs showed up for bicentennial or that waited until 1995 when they redid the Thompson Bridge. and then it becomes the Thompson
Okay.
Bridge
I see.
because it's got its name on it.
It sure does.
But that's when the names showed up.
Okay.
Slate Bridge might have had a plaque on it before. That's the only one that may have.
Okay.
So,
Well, even
now, this is the other thing that I uncovered. I mean, the Sentinel having its archives online. I don't know if you noticed this when you went through your research for bridges for Swanzey, but there's a postcard out there that has a slate-covered bridge, the one that burned, and it has under it the bridge that Henry Ford tried to buy. Have you seen that?
I have seen that.
Right. Well, I went when the Sentinel came online. It's like So I searched that, and lo and behold, in January of 31, there's an article in the paper, and it says that the town its fate is going to the town meeting in March because the select board hasn't made up their mind yet. They're still in discussions with Henry Ford because what he was not looking for the Slate Bridge, he was looking for the West Swanzey Bridge and its ties to Denman Thompson because he wanted it. It says that he wanted to put on the play of the Old Homestead.
Oh.
And he wanted everything with connections to Denman's boyhood home.
That makes sense.
So.
Well, luckily they voted no.
Well, I don't know as it ever got that far.
Oh, good.
Because I went to look, I went looking at town reports, which if it was on the warrant would have been, they wouldn't have told me whether they voted yes or no. Obviously, I know they would have voted no, but
right,
because it's still here.
Right.
But I don't think the select board, for whatever reason, I think the select board they turned it down.
Good.
Because he was going to replace the bridge. He would have taken the bridge, but he would have replaced it with what I don't know.
Right. Well, I'm glad that he didn't buy it.
Those are those little weird things, but that's the thing about the Sentinel online. You can answer some of those.
Yeah, it definitely can. Well, and you have to be true to Swanzey naming their bridge multiple names. So the Sawyer's Crossing Bridge is the Crescent Bridge, and it's just the how you all roll over there. So when I'm researching, it makes it even more complicated.
And then you might find it called the Arthur Treacher Bridge or something like Arthur Godfrey Bridge.
Yes, that is a great story. Do you have any last thoughts on what the Thompson Bridge means to your community?
Let's put it this way. I think it sort of came out at the point in the 90s when it closed. And then it went to the town meeting to authorize funds to rebuild it. And it failed the first time.
Right.
And I'm forgetting whether it failed 2 times or not. But anyway, it finally passed. But that was done, totally with our funds. That was not 80-20 split. So that's why it was a tougher sell.
Right.
But, everybody rallied around it. I mean, and Swanzey's one of those towns. It's big enough. It's 45 square miles. And you can easily see where, this will benefit the people over here, but it doesn't benefit the other people over there. So,
right. Yeah.
But they all rallied around and got it together. So let's hope we can keep that going. I mean, I've grown up for 65 years. I've seen 4 covered bridges every day of my life.
Right.
So.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today about Denman Thompson, and so we can learn a little bit more about the namesake of the Thompson Bridge. Covered Bridges of New Hampshire is created by me and recorded in Hancock, New Hampshire. The song Old New Hampshire was arranged and performed by Josh Black. The introduction is courtesy of Greg Kretschmar. This podcast is a companion to my book, Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. You can find out more about the book, the podcast, blog posts, upcoming events, and an interactive covered bridge map at coveredbridgesnh.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. Please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kim Chandler. Thanks for listening.